In the summer of 1212, the sun climbed over the parched highlands of Andalusia like a burnished shield, and the wind moved low across the scrub as if careful not to disturb what history had arranged. Two armies faced one another with the patience of stones. To the north stood a confederation that should not have existed, a truce between rival crowns that had learned the hard arithmetic of survival. To the south waited a caliphate that had long defined the terms of power, certain that its weight of men and memory would settle the matter again. The ground between them was a field, but it felt like a verdict. The Christian host gathered where the hills opened into a long tableland. Dust clung to woolen cloaks and the rims of kite shields. At the center rode King Alfonso VIII of Castile, lean from hard campaigning, his face set in the composure of a man who remembered defeat and had learned not to fear it. On his right advanced the contingent of King Peter II of Aragon, Catalan and Aragonese knights, whose iron discipline gave their bright pennons an air of inevitability. On the left moved the men of Navarre beneath King Sancho VII, whose height and mailed mass appeared to lift the standard he carried into a weather of its own. Their banners did not match in paint or weave, yet they tilted toward the same east as the sun. For a rare moment, the peninsula's crowns preferred unity to precedent. Behind these kings rode abbeys of steel. The orders of Santiago and Calatrava, sworn to Iberian soil, tightened their lines near the Castilian center, while the Templars and Hospitallers, seasoned in Levantine war, formed bright hinges of mail along the front. From beyond the Pyrenees had come companies of French crusaders under the promise of indulgence. Some had fallen away in the march, unmade by heat and distance, yet enough remained to thicken the ranks. From Portugal and Leon came lances without their sovereigns, men who needed no royal presence to recognize the sign on their surcoats. Voices along the file differed in language and accent, but the morning lit every cross with the same color. Numbers did not favor them. The coalition could claim near 20,000, perhaps a little more. Supply trains had chewed their patience. Armor trapped the noon like a kiln. Every soldier had a private ledger in which thirst and loyalty debated. Still they had gathered, and it is often true that gathering is the first victory. Across the shallows of shimmering air, the Almohad Caliphate took its stand. Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir, called Mir al-Mamouline in Christian mouths, commanded an army that seemed to widen the horizon as it formed. Berber infantry, sturdy in their ranks, held the lower lines. Arab cavalry, quick and exact, waited for the moment when speed would be worth more than weight. Andalusian veterans, familiar with the Iberian light and the temper of its enemies, stood where gaps might form. Closest to the Caliphate pavilion, where the silk walls swayed like a quiet warning, the Black Guard locked shields in rows and chains linked them arm to arm. Those chains did not shame them. They served as an oath that looked like iron. The terrain would favor the patient. A long rise faced the Christian lines. Trenches dug during the pause that always precedes violence, notched the slope and took the glare like wet ink. Behind those breaks in the soil, the Almohad line deepened into a second and sterner rank. The Caliph's commanders had measured ground and time with the caution of men who trusted math more than omen. They had arranged a field that punished any advance, careless of angle or breath. For several days, the armies watched one another work at readiness. Skirmishers hunted for edges that could not be seen from a saddle. Priests and cadis steadied hands and bent heads. In the Christian camp, calculation contended with dread. Some Frenchmen slipped away at night toward the passes, convinced that sin forgiven is not the same as death delayed. Engineers counted the distance to the first trench and found no figure that made sense of it. Men told stories of Alfonso's resolve with the same care they gave their buckles, because each needed to hold. The morning chosen for decision came with a clean sky and a faint stain of wood smoke from cook fires already turned to ash. Alfonso VIII rode the center where the ground fell into a long shallow. The standards of the Templars and Hospitallers flanked him. The cloth caught high on a friendly wind. Peter of Aragon wheeled his right into a steady line, the sunlight riding along spearheads in a single moving sentence. Sancho of Navarre drew his left into a denser formation meant for pushing and for enduring. Along the Christian front, shield rims touched, and the murmured prayers of thousands made an audible seam. No trick would serve them. No ruse could improve the arithmetic of the field. The order passed mouth to mouth with an economy that made it feel older than words. The first movement was slow. Feet found rhythm in the bruised earth. Archers loosed a trial of arrows to test the air and the temper of the enemy. Then the line hardened into speed. The vanguard, chosen for weight and will, went in with spear halves low and axes ready to finish any break they made. The Castilian center struck first, because the center had been invited to do so. The Templars and Hospitallers stepped into the crush beside them, iron upon iron, white mantles darkening where the day found them. On the right, Catalan and Aragonese lances took the slope at a slant to avoid the deepest trench. On the left, Navarrese infantry slipped into a wedge and shortened the distance with the impatience of men who love momentum. The Almohad front had expected probes. It had not expected commitment. Light infantry that had been placed to tire the Christians rather than stop them began to drift backward, then to run. Banners that had looked like punctuation in the morning wind began to look like fragments of thought. The Christian vanguard, elbows tight and voices thin with exertion, drove a mouth into the line and widened it with each step. Steel did not slice so much as insist. Where a shield fell, a second took its place. Where a man went down, the rank closed like a book on a table. Chronicles would later claim that something more than training animated the push. It is hard to measure such things, but it is not hard to see their consequence. The first Almohad line lost coherence in minutes that felt like hours. Runners carried alarm up the rise toward the second rank, where commanders measured their own calm against the news. The Christians felt the give, heard it in the pitch of enemy voices, and tasted it in the air that rushes into every broken shape. They did not chase. There is a kind of courage that loves pursuit. Another kind understands that victory is not a sprint, but a staircase. Alfonso signaled the halt. Horn calls folded across the field. Men took one breath, then another. Captains rebuilt the front as if mending a net. Priests moved with water and words. The orders rotated small knots of men to the rear to drink and retighten belts. Along the Christian right, Peter corrected the angle of his next advance by the width of a shield. Along the left, Sancho trimmed his wedge until it looked less like a blade and more like a key. Ahead, the slope steepened into the real work. Trenches lay like open mouths. The second Almohad line stood behind them, deeper, sterner, and already steadying to receive the next impact. Archers tested range and found it favorable. The black guard around the pavilion leaned forward as if to meet the future halfway. A hush rode the hill and made the cries of the wounded seem farther away than they were. Heat pressed its claim. Sweat salted lips and blurred vision. Leather stiffened where sun reached it. Shields had begun to feel like doors torn from their hinges. Yet along the Christian line, a different weight gathered. The kings had not sent their men where they were not willing to go. Alfonso had ridden far enough forward for the dust of the first collision to powder his greaves. Peter had dismounted to walk the line for a dozen paces so that men would see the economy of his expression and copy it. Sancho had raised his visor so that voices could find his eyes and hear the steadiness in his answer. The pause ended without ceremony. Drums on the hill gave the signal that the defense would not descend. The second Christian advance began with fewer words. The lines moved again, closer, tighter, more aware of what waited than men ought to be. The ground shook in a smaller circle because men who have learned the price of momentum spend it carefully. They went into the trench line with a patience that looked like rage from a distance. Ladders and fascines met ditch and earthwork. The first files crossed and made room, then the files behind them made that room costly. Everywhere along the slope, pairs of men worked as if sharing a single body. The climb bit, the shield edge cut into palm and forearm, the air filled with the metal smell that always follows upon certainty. Progress slowed. That was the measure of the enemy's preparation, rather than a failure of will. The Almohad's second line absorbed impact the way seasoned timber takes a nail. Countercharges came in clean geometry. Arrows fell in clever arcs. The day that had begun like a promise began to feel like a condition. Yet the Christian formation did not fray. It narrowed, thickened, and learned to breathe in shallower sips. By noon, the battlefield had remade itself into a single shape. A slow, grinding climb toward a pavilion that looked smaller than it was because the hill owned perspective. The first Almohad line lay behind the Christians like a bad memory. The second stood before them like a fact. Knights checked girths and flexed fingers. Infantry shifted weight from foot to foot to keep blood honest. The cross and the crescent had met, and neither had yielded the word that matters most. The dust settled for a heartbeat that felt like an omen. Signals lifted along the Christian center. Captains lowered blades in a single shared angle. What had been audacity turned into method. Men who had been strangers at dawn had learned one another's rhythms by noon. Ahead waited a hill, a trench, and a wall of shields. Beyond them waited the pavilion and the chains. The next step would not ask for bravery. It would ask for endurance. The sun stood higher, and the day moved from its beginning into its argument. The first victory of the morning had arrived like a sudden rain in a dry land. But no one in the Christian host mistook relief for conclusion. The broken forward ranks of the Almohads lay behind them in testament to what determination could accomplish. Yet ahead rose the true impediment to triumph. The plain angled upward toward the fortified heart of the Muslim line, a slope shaped by both nature and calculation. Trenches scarred its face. Stakes and earthworks interrupted any simple sense of ascent. What waited above was not merely a second line, but a deliberate break on every kind of courage. The Christians reformed their ranks with the economy of men who had drilled such moments into their sinew. Captains whispered distances and timings. Shields were lifted from the hands of the fallen and passed forward along the line. Knights loosened the sting of dried sweat beneath their cuirasses with small, practiced shifts of the shoulders. Priests checked that their words had not run dry. Anything that could be readied without noise was readied, because silence now served the purpose of intent. Alfonso VIII called his senior commanders into a small knot by the standard of Castile. The wind worried the fabric, but could not make it seem uncertain. He surveyed the slope, and his eyes measured the distance from trench to trench with the exhaustion of an old scholar and the hunger of a young captain. Peter II of Aragon stood beside him, his jaw set in its usual habit of listening without complaint. Sancho VII of Navarre loomed at the edge of the council, a mailed tower who did not need his height to imply his importance. Their discussion required neither long words nor doubts expressed in full sentences. Each king understood that the cost of hesitation would be counted in hours and in blood. signals passed down the line, not with flourish, but with the flat practicality of hands and consequence. Archers advanced in intervals to test the range again. The slope compressed angles, and arrows that might have flown true on the plain met air that no longer welcomed them. The Almohads answered with shafts in reply. The sound of arrows arriving without voices attached to them always felt older than battle itself. When the order finally came, the Christian lines moved with less haste and more intention. The memories of success earlier that morning lent confidence, but confidence now traveled with caution. The vanguard stepped into the incline, measuring weight and fatigue as much as momentum. Spears angled forward, not in a run, but in a stride that conserved strength for the moments where the earth would no longer be level. The first trench revealed itself not by distance, but by sudden absence of ground underfoot. Men in the front ranks dropped into pits that were deeper than they appeared. The formations absorbed the shock and bridged the gaps. Ladders and bundled branches followed, hauled by hands that knew they could not wait for convenience. The trenches were not fatal in themselves, yet they were tools of tempo. Slowing the ascent allowed the second line of the Almohads to bring its full weight to bear. Shields of the Berber infantry rose like a second horizon. Their spears angled down to greet the Christians trying to climb. The clash here was harder to narrate because progress came at the pace of inches and allowed only inches to show it. Muscles burned with more than exertion. They burned with the knowledge that slipping backward would carry an entire rank in its failure. Voices that had carried songs of confidence earlier in the day now shaped shorter grunts of industry. It became clear that this line would not break as the first had done. The slope cast the Christians into a funnel where numbers added little advantage. The earth itself worked against acceleration. The defenders, fresher and square on their footing, struck with the ease of those who rely on physics as much as courage. For a time, the fight lived exactly where the shield edges met the ground. The heat intensified every grievance of war. Armor that had merely felt hot before now seared like forge iron. Thirst began to steal clarity. Men loosened grips, not out of choice, but because fingers stiffened in the posture of fatigue. Some turned their heads to breathe, and in turning their heads, saw the glitter of the caliphate pavilion above them, and wished breath alone could chase that distance closed. The Almohads pressed their advantage. They rotated the front-line troops with a system that suggested years of practice. Reserves moved forward in neat blocks that never broke shape. Their cavalry waited at the edges, ready to pour into any opening. The defenders had mastered patience. Every moment the Christians failed to rise another pace up the slope was a moment spent becoming weaker. Shouts ran down the Christian center. At first it sounded like alarm, then like plea. Banners wavered as if they too were tired. A tremor of retreat began at the middle. No larger than a line of men who thought one step backward might bank strength for a later surge. Their neighbors, seeing that step, misread its motive and made their own. What had looked like a united advance risked turning into a slow unraveling. Alfonso VIII saw the hesitation from where he sat his horse beneath a white banner, smudged now with the day's work. His staff urged him to remain back where commanders belonged. This was advice given by men who understood war, in theory, more than consequence. Alfonso drove his heels into his charger's flanks and rode toward the breach before he could be convinced by the mathematics of prudence. Spectacle matters when hope is a currency. The king rode into the narrow space where discipline had begun to falter. His voice did not carry above the din so much as command a channel in it. His sword, held upright, looked like a line drawn in the air that dared men to cross it in the wrong direction. To see Alfonso so close to the spear points shamed those who had thought to falter. Lines straightened themselves in response. Peter II of Aragon followed suit on the right. Dismounting where the mud of trampled earth hid sharp stones, he walked the ranks and imposed order by proximity. Men drew breath in time with him and struck their shields again in rhythm. Sancho VII did not bother to speak. He crashed into his own wavering line like a hammer looking for a nail, restoring structure with the implication that quitting would require passing through him first. The orders of knighthood took the signal as permission rather than command. Templars and Hospitallers dismounted in clusters to reinforce the shields of soldiers who had been strangers that morning. The Brethren of Santiago and Calatrava tightened their grip and drove deeper into the slope. The renewed push purchased ground in heartbeats rather than in hopes. The Christians found ways to use their smaller weapons in tighter places. The Almohads, feeling resistance stiffen, learned that fatigue can be indiscriminate. The enemy answered by sending forward Arab cavalry in a sudden pulse meant to lever open the line. Hooves struck the incline in clattering crescendos. Christian shields bowed inward, but the cavalry met spear points rather than disorder. Mounts screamed and twisted away. Riders wheeled back with the knowledge that the center would not collapse cheaply. Still, the advantage remained uphill. The Almohads pushed. The Christians endured. Hours loosened their shapes into a single knot, where both sides bled for guesses no one could be sure of. Dust climbed into the sunlight and turned visibility into a memory. Now and then, the wind lifted the veil of haze and revealed the pavilion like a reminder of what ambition could still claim. Retreat no longer tempted any mind capable of thought. The question now hung on what power would arrive to shift the balance. Alfonso kept his horse where the danger was thickest. Peter's steadying presence hardened the right flank like iron cooling in a mold. Sancho waited for the moment when a wall could become a wedge. The slope did not yield. The trench lines did not disappear. Yet something in the Christian host began to feel less like a struggle to resist defeat and more like a patience looking for its proof. Men remembered that battles can turn in seconds that cost hours to earn. Late afternoon pushed the sun into a lower arc that cast long shadows down the incline. Heat relented enough to loosen muscles and reopen lungs. The dust began to settle, revealing silhouettes rather than shapes. In those silhouettes, men recognized one another, not by creed or crown, but by persistence. The line had learned a rhythm that ignored the confusion mapped along its flanks. Above them, the Almohad second line still looked whole. Yet on the Christian side, eyes shifted up the slope with a different expression than they had carried an hour before. Weariness had been replaced by attention. The kings had taken their place among the front ranks. Elite cavalry and reserves gathered behind the press. The moment when will must become force drew nearer. The hill had held. That much was clear. It had held because holding was its nature. The question that remained was whether the hill would continue to belong to the defenders or if the night would teach a new owner its angles. As the sun dipped another finger's width toward the hills beyond, the horn sounded again, not to pause, but to promise. Lines braced, shields rose. The pause that would precede the final surge took a single breath shared by thousands. The day's argument had not yet reached its sentence. The pavilion loomed above like a claim awaiting proof. The next charge would decide who inherited the slope and, through it, the future that lay beyond the hills. Evening approached, but the day refused conclusion. The sun lowered its crown to the western rims of Andalusia. Yet the light held on over Las Navas de Tolosa as if the heavens themselves refused to let darkness interfere with what remained to be decided. The battlefield smelled of iron and dust, of sweat thickened by fear and conviction. The silhouettes of men became blocks of shadow, and the slope remained a crucible that demanded a final proof. The Christian line tightened. Knights checked reins and balance, settling into saddles with the stillness of carved stone before a storm. Infantry anchored shields deep into the soil, creating a wall of discipline built upon the painful memory of the past hours. What had begun as a coalition of many kingdoms now advanced like a single will. Across the steepening ground rose the second Almohad line, unbroken, shields ready, intent carved into their posture. They had taken the worst that daylight could offer, and still stood where the caliph intended them to stand. Alfonso VIII rode forward through the ranks one final time, acknowledging their endurance with nods rather than words. His armor carried the dust of both advance and setback. The weight of the battle had written itself into the set of his shoulders. He raised his sword slightly, not in flourish, but in recognition of the men who had refused to turn. That small gesture tightened spines along the rank as effectively as any prayer. To the right, Peter of Aragon reorganized his cavalry into a formation meant to do more than simply endure. Lines staggered themselves into a pattern that could swing rather than press. The Aragonese understood that the next minutes would require cuts rather than pushes. Navarre's king prepared his own contingent with the physical clarity of a man shaped for moments where doubt had no purchase. Sancho VII checked the straps along his gauntlets with practiced delicacy, then took his place where the slope met the line, his form conspicuous not by intention, but by nature. The order to advance traveled as a pulse rather than a cry. The Christian line stepped into its last gamble. The slope that had resisted them became a slope they intended to claim. Shields bit ground, lifted, and bit again. The second Almohad line braced, knowing that survival demanded the exactness of pressure and response. Steel rose on both sides in a posture that defined the narrow distance between surviving and prevailing. The collision arrived not in a furious charge, but in an advancing weight impossible to scatter. Infantry drove into the trenches with tools instead of speed. Where a step could not be found, a hand made one. Swords did not flash with cinematic haste. They adhered to geometry, the unglamorous shapes that close distance and break resolve. Every foot gained cost a breath. Every shield position held cost a memory. As the infantry bound itself to the final measures of the slope, the signal passed to the cavalry reserves. Aragonese knights on the right flank surged forward with hard precision, their mounts pounding a rhythm that answered the moment more accurately than any trumpet. The ground did not receive them easily, yet their formation carved space from the defenders who had prepared for infantry alone. Where lines bent under that impact, momentum made shape. The Hospitallers followed, their discipline not in speed, but in density. Their horses did not seek to flee hazards. They carried weight where weight needed to be delivered. The orders of Calatrava and Santiago pressed immediately behind them, not seeking heroism, but exploiting weakness. Their strikes did not aim for conquest in a single blow. They aimed to prove that the hill no longer held the same opinion of the contest. The Almohades countered with a controlled retreat into the narrowing space where the caliph's pavilion crowned the rise. The Black Guard stood between that pavilion and the Christians now climbing toward it. Their weapons glinted without invitation. Their armor bore chains that clinked as one when they moved. They made a barrier not designed to yield. Behind them, Muhammad al-Nasir watched with the removable calm of a man, convinced that the final line would remain unbroken. Yet the slope and the hours had altered the balance. When Sancho VII and his Navarrese cavalry struck the seam forming near the pavilion's left, they struck with a simplicity that rendered mathematics irrelevant. His height and armor made him a standard unto himself. His men drove at the juncture where infantry could not step aside and cavalry could not rotate. That narrow mistake widened into a breach. Knights from the Templars, seeing the opening, drove toward the pavilion as if drawing the battlefield into a single point. Hospitallers and Castilian heavy infantry sealed the breach behind them, ensuring that retreat could not correct what had begun. The Black Guard fought with a severity that honored the chain between them. They denied their bodies retreat even when advantage demanded it. They made the final steps costlier than any earlier hour of the day. Yet cost could not prevent conclusion. The Christians had gathered too much momentum into too little space. Their will did not expand, it compressed. The Black Guard fell in clusters, still bound to one another when their knees touched ground. The pavilion loomed close enough now for voices to register the caliph's proximity. Panic spread where conviction had stood a moment before. The banners of the Almohads folded inward like sails, surrendering to a wind they could not read. Muhammad al-Nasir fled. His standard vanished so suddenly that allies struggled to believe it had been there in the first place. Horses bolted. Command dissolved. The Almohad second line collapsed not from lack of courage, but from the removal of its center. The Christians did not celebrate. They pursued. Their task was not to scatter enemies, but to prevent those enemies from finding a shape in tomorrow. Along the slope, men who had risen slowly now descended with a speed given by conviction rather than cruelty. The number of the fallen grew quickly, and their placement sketched the path that had led the Christians to the pavilion. The ground that had defied them for hours now accepted their claim without argument. Above, the pavilion, torn and trembling, no longer belonged to the caliphate. As the sun finally surrendered to the horizon, evening arrived with fewer witnesses than morning had promised. The silence that followed did not come from peace. It came from exhaustion no longer contested. Alfonso remained mounted, surveying the field with the caution of one who had learned to mistrust any illusion of triumph. Peter removed his helm slowly, allowing the heir to consider his survival before he trusted it. Sancho remained astride, letting the fact of his presence finish speaking for him. The Almohad Empire would not disappear in a single night. Yet its authority over Iberia had suffered a fracture that could not be translated into recovery. The gates to Andalusia, which once had closed like a fortress, now admitted the possibility of return. Cities that had seemed permanent in their rule would, in time, rediscover the sound of church bells. Castile, Aragon, and Navarre would part again in politics, but they would remain tied by memory to the moment when their swords agreed. The slope emptied into night. The banners, still ragged, marked the new boundary where faith had negotiated land from certainty. The day had proven that unity could accomplish what history had insisted was too heavy to move. The pavilion no longer cast its shadow. The chains no longer commanded restraint. The hill belonged to different voices now. The battle had reclaimed ground. It had also reclaimed the expectation of a country whose future had once been assumed lost. History is shaped not only by those who win battles, but by those who refuse to surrender their future. If you want to witness more turning points like Las Navas de Tolosa, remain with us as we uncover the moments that remade the world. Like, comment, and share this story so its legacy endures.